everyone, and early Shabbat Shalom as we enter this sort of dark part of the year, at least in my hemisphere. It's really nice to come together and bring light through Torah. Today we are joined by Rabbi Elliot Goldberg, who will lead us in this week's Parsha. We are introduced to the complicated character of Joseph, and we there's a lot of juice in this Torah portion. Thank you to those who are introducing themselves. If this is your first time here, we'd particularly love to know that so we can offer you a warm welcome. But I will stop chit-chatting and we will get to the text. I will turn it over to you, Rabbi.
All right. Hi, everybody. And an early Shabbat Shalom from at least my time zone. I see where it's a worldwide audience, as always, and both east and west of me. So lots of time zones. It's good that we have this way to come together to learn Torah. As Mara said, we're starting the Joseph story this week. Here's what I'd love to do today. Want to provide some context from where we've been so far and how it sets up the Joseph story, and think about how the Joseph story fits into the Torah as a whole. And then we're going to look at the beginning verses of the Joseph story to see the complexity of the story and the number of characters who played a part in setting the stage for what happens in the story, and why that's important will come out, I hope, in the introduction, which I'm going to start right now. So that's a little where we're headed. As we go, we'll share I'm going to share my screen at some point to some sources, but it'll be two links that we'll share at the right time to Sefaria. You'll see it on the screen if you want to share screens. If you want to open up the text in its own browser, you'll have those links ready to do that. But before we get to those texts, just some background. One of the narrative themes of the Torah, especially in Genesis and Bereshit, has to do with God's ideal vision for the world, and how when the vision meets the reality of how people respond to it, how God changes the shape and scope of this vision. Let me tell you what I mean by that. We open the book of Genesis with creation, and people are created as sort of the peak of that creative moment. It seems as if the world and all of its parts is created for them. They're placed in the Garden of Eden, where they don't have to work, where life is wonderful, where the setting is perfect, and things are supposed to stay that way. But it turns out that in this perfect ideal setting, where there's more or less just one rule: don't eat from the tree, the people can't hold by that rule. It's a perfect setting with one rule: people eat from the tree, and alas, they are sent out of the garden, and life has to, for people, plays out in a different setting. So that's change number one. The idea is, like, we should have lived forever in the Garden of Eden, but no, we couldn't handle it. We're going to go to a different space. Then it turns out, over the generations, there are many different stories, but I'm jumping ahead to the generation of Noah. Left without rules and without structure, society erodes, and God looks at the world and the experiment of humanity and says, oh boy, left to their own doing, things have eroded, and we can't just let people be. I'm gonna start over. I'm gonna destroy the world and take the best of what we have, Noah and Noah's family, and start over. In some way, it's a reset, right? God reboots the world. The world is wiped clean by the flood. We start over with Noah, But not so long after Noah, things start to deteriorate again, and God changes the plan. All right, says God, I'm not going to put my faith in all of humanity. I'm going to find a representative um, of all of humanity, and I'm going to take this person and their descendants, and they're going to have a special pact with me. And those are the people who are going to live the way um, the world was designed for them to live in. And those are going to be the people in whom God puts their faith. God puts his faith, and it should work out better that way. And much of the story of the book of Genesis is right about the God's building a relationship with this particular family, and how we move them, how they move forward. And of course, that family turns into the people of Israel. And later, the rest of the Torah is about the struggles of the people of Israel to come to terms with how God wants them to live, and God coming to terms with the fact that this people can be stiff-necked and not always make it work. So that's a narrative theme of the Torah as a whole. I see some people in the chat are pointing to other moments that you could read into that narrative that I didn't skip, that I skipped over, partly because I want to get to Parashat Shavua. There are other ways to line that in. But before we get to Parashat Shavua, I want to look at one piece of the conversation that God has with Abraham about what this future is going to look like. So I'm sharing my screen. Oh, I have the wrong text up. Don't read this one yet. I'm going to click to the other page. Part of what God says, here's Genesis 15, verses 13 and 14. Part of what God says to Abraham, in one of the passages where God is sealing the deal with Abraham to be the father of the special people, right? The ancestor of the special people who will lead God's path in the world. God says the following: and know well that your offspring shall be strangers in a land not theirs, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But I will execute judgment on the nation that they shall serve, and in the end they shall go free with great wealth. It's an interesting little piece in the story of Abraham. Right? God is promising Abraham, go to a new place, follow my ways, be my people, and I will bless you and your descendants. There's a lot that goes into that covenant, but in a couple places, here's one of them. Right? God says to Abraham, part of what's going to happen is one day your offsprings are going to leave this land that I brought you to. They're going to be enslaved there for 400 years. And then afterwards, I'll redeem them from that slavery, and they're going to go free with great wealth. It's an interesting element of the covenant between God and Abraham. And of course, it is a key foreshadowing here of a big piece of the story of the Torah, right? That Abraham's descendants end up in Egypt. Abraham's descendants end up slaves in Egypt. Abraham's descendants are freed from slavery. And as a result of their being freed from slavery, they then can enter into the covenant with God and live on in God's path and in God's way. It's not necessarily something that seems like a necessary piece. And like a question I always have is like, why is this part of the story? Why is this part of the pact between Abraham and God? And given the introduction I said before, part of what it seems to me is that God has this understanding, right? Maybe God can make this relationship with Abraham and his immediate descendants. But as the people grow, as the generations go by, this agreement between God and Abraham has to somehow be sustained, and something that in order for it to move from a family to a people, the people has to have some collective experience through which they come to attach themselves to God. And the years of slavery and oppression and the redemption that follows is a piece of that. There's more to say about this covenant, and maybe when we get back in the Parashat Shavua cycle to this Parsha where Genesis 15 falls, we'll look at that some. But the reason why I start with that today is because the story of Joseph, which we begin this week, first, in and of itself, is a great story. It's the longest story. It's in the Torah. Some people think of it almost as a novella, right? It covers many parshiot. It's one continuous story. It does span a number of years, but longer than any individual narrative in Breshit for sure, in the Torah as a whole, probably depending on how you count. Like you can think about it in lots of different ways, but it's one extended long story. It has compelling characters, lots of family drama, it picks up on lots of themes of the Torah. But where I want to start with today is one of the things that the Joseph story does is help fulfill the vision of these two verses that you see on your screen right now, which is in order for the people of Israel, the descendants of Abraham, to become God's people, the things that these two verses predict have to happen. Abraham's descendants have to get to a land that's not theirs. They have to be enslaved and oppressed, right, and become free, which will be the story of the book of Exodus, which will start after the Joseph story. But the Joseph story, in part, is set up to be able to get Abraham's descendants to be strangers in a land that's not theirs. And I'm starting, so I want to put that note into place, and then we'll turn to the story today, because what I want us to look at is how the actions, behaviors of a whole series of characters conspire to help fulfill the vision of this verses, which the descendants of Abraham have to wind up in a land that's not theirs. How they become slaves there, we'll turn to when we get to Parashat Shemot, right, the beginning of Exodus, which is there. But so the frame today is how is it that the whole story here is set up to help get Abraham's descendants to the land of Egypt. So I want to take us through the first verses of the Parsha, and as we do, think about the different characters and how each of them play a role in setting the stage for this transition to Egypt, right here at the beginning of the story. And after we're through that, we can talk about what that might say at the end and what that looks like. So I'm shifting to Genesis 37, verse 2. We'll scroll through the Sepharia text. And Mary, if you're able to plop that link in the chat for people, I'd appreciate that too. Thank you. All right, so here we go. This is the line. This then is the line of Jacob. These are Jacob's descendants. At the end of last week's Parsha, we talked about Esau's descendants. We shift the focus now to Jacob as Jacob and Esau's story has come to an end. At 17 years of age, and the focus comes to Joseph. Joseph is 17 years old, and Joseph tended the flocks with his brothers as a helper to the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. So children of two of Jacob's four wives. Joseph, it comes from Rachel, not Bilhah or Zilpah. He's assigned to work with some of his older half-brothers, and Joseph brought bad reports of them to his father. So moment number one in this story, Joseph himself, in his behavior, he's sent off to work with some of his brothers. And whether he helped or not, we're not sure at this moment, but we know when they come home from the fields, Joseph, the younger brother attached to this group, becomes a tattletale, has a lot to say to his father about the behavior, the actions of his brother in the fields. We don't have the content of that, but moment number one to notice, Joseph creates some tension with his brothers by telling on them to his dad. Maybe justified because maybe their behavior was worthy of these comments. Maybe not, we're not sure, but Joseph is an actor here to see. Verse 3, now Israel loved Joseph best of all his sons. He was a child of his old age, and he made him an ornamented tunic. So we know Joseph, not the youngest son. Benjamin is the youngest son, but Joseph was a son that Jacob was not sure he was going to have. And once he had him from his beloved wife, Rachel, attached to him, he's called by the Torah, right, a child of his old age. So the rabbis have a lot to say. The Midrash has a lot to say about what it looks like when someone has a child as they're older and you have a special attachment, maybe to your youngest child, to your baby, to the last one that you have, or one that you have when you're an older age. But Joseph is loved best. He gets a special ornamented tunic. And we see this in this verse. Israel now plays a part in the story. Jacob gives preference to Joseph. So Joseph's behavior makes him stand out with his brother. The father doesn't help matters by giving preference to the son, both in the love he gives to him and other gifts as well. Some of the commentaries point out the other brothers had to wear regular clothes that they wore work clothes when they worked in the field. And Joseph got this fancy coat, separating them out and adding to the tension, which we see in the next verse, right? And when his brothers saw that his father loved him more than any of the brothers, they hated him so that they could not speak a friendly word to him, right? So the impact of Jacob having a favorite son is that the rest of the sons turn their anger not to their father for giving preference to the brother, but the anger is directed towards the son who receives their dad's attention before them. As if this was made the situation tense enough, well, then comes the matter of the dreams. Once Joseph had a dream, which he told to his brothers, and they hated him even more. Right, Joseph, the dreamer, we know that's part of his character. He has dreams; he can interpret them. It's a skill he'll use later in story and this week and other weeks. But the dreams which he reports, we know, don't help with the situation with his brothers. Right, here's one of the dreams, verse 7. We were binding sheaves in the field when suddenly my sheaf stood up and remained upright, and your sheaves gathered around and bowed low to my sheaf. Hey, brothers, says Joseph, I had a dream. We're all working in the field, which we know they do, although he got to do it in his fancy coat. And when he did, he came home and told on them to his parents. But there we were in my dream working in the field, says Joseph, and all of our sheaves that we had made all of a sudden come to life, and mine stands up straight, and yours bows down to me. His brothers they express some of their frustration. Do you mean to reign over us? Do you mean to rule over us? And they hated him even more for his talk about his dreams. Joseph has these dreams. Maybe that's not his own fault, right? If we have dreams experts in the crowd, right? It's coming from your subconscious. You might not be responsible directly for the content of your own dreams. If I could pull Joseph aside, I might have said to him, hey, buddy, wonderful dreams. Come tell me sometime when your brothers aren't around, but not a good thing to talk about while you're working in the field or maybe at the dinner table. Telling of these dreams are only going to make it worse for you with your brothers who aren't so fond of you in the first place anyways. Not the smartest move. But yet Joseph tells the dreams and others as well. We have the next, right? I'm going to skip over the next dream, but there's more of the same. The brothers do not like the content. It makes them even angrier. I will say, after a couple of these dreams are shared, we'll skip down to verse 11. We hear the Torah tell us his brothers were wrought up at him. They're angry at him, and his father kept the matter in mind. Right, the father is also seen in the second dream bowing down to his son as well. While the brothers are angered by this, the father says, this is my favorite son. Maybe there's a future for him. Doesn't speak out against it. Doesn't help the brothers or their cause. So the Torah's the Torah's depicting a tense family situation. The step one, father has a favorite child, doesn't help. Step two, brother makes things worse by tattling on his brothers, telling of these dreams. The brothers' emotions are festering, unchecked by Joseph himself amongst each other. They probably fuel each other, and the dad or parents don't do anything to step in to try to change it. They just, dad here keeps the matter in mind that maybe there's some story in it. Then we come to the moment, the first sort of the climax of this first scene. One time, the brothers had gone to pasture their flock at Shechem. So the brothers are off right there. They're flock people, which means when they go out to tend to their flocks, they wander to find where the good feeding grounds are. They travel with the brothers travel with the flock to Shechem, not where the household is currently encamped. And Israel says to Joseph, your brothers are pasturing at Shechem. Go, come, I will send you to them. Go off, join your brothers, right? We've had our private time. You've sat here with your lovely cloak. But now you should go hang out with your brothers some. And Joseph says, I'm ready, and he's sent off. And he said to him, go see how your brothers are doing and bring back to me word of how they're doing. He sent him off to the valley of Hebron, which is, he sends him off. So maybe Jacob is not helping here. Go join your brothers, but he doesn't send them to go join your brothers and work harder because you missed the first day of work because you've been with me. But he says, no, go see how your brothers are doing, gather information, and come back and tell me about it. He plays into the dynamic that's not working so well, and sends Joseph off. Joseph says, I'm ready. And he goes. So when Joseph reaches Shem, here's what happens. A man, an unidentified man, came to him, just says Ish in the Hebrew. We don't know who the person is. A person meets Joseph wandering in the fields, and the man asks Joseph, what are you looking for? He sees a person, maybe in his fancy cloak, maybe not. What are you doing in the field? What are you looking for? What's going on? People aren't usually wandering around like you are. Can I help you? Maybe you look lost. And Joseph answers, I'm looking for my brothers. Could you tell me where they are pasturing? So Joseph says to this stranger he meets, I was supposed to come meet my brothers. Perhaps you know them, Jacob's sons. There are a lot of them. They have sheep. They were around. I can't find them. Can you tell me where they are? And somehow the man knows they have gone from here. I've heard them say, let us go to Dothan. And Joseph followed his brothers and found them. So here's a scene where before the characters who are acting are all part of the family. And here we have this unidentified anonymous person that Joseph meets up with. Without this person, what comes next would not have happened, right? Joseph could have wandered the fields, not found his brothers, returned home and said, hey, Dad, I went to find my brothers in Shechem. They're not there anymore, so I came back home. But alas, he bumps into this stranger, and the stranger fulfills the role in the plot to help redirect Joseph from where his brothers once were to where his brothers now are. In some ways, this anonymous man plays is a literary device to help move the plot forward and get Joseph, the main character of this story, to find his brothers where more things will transpire because the plot wouldn't move forward in the way that it has to if they didn't. The commentators and the rabbis in the Midrash, when they look at this anonymous, unnamed person, they see echoes of other anonymous, unnamed people who came before in the stories who are often seen as messengers of God. The text clearly says Ish identifies this person as a person. The commentaries and the rabbinic Midrash says that this Ish is actually an angelic figure, and they name him as Gabriel, one of the God's ministering angels. And if that is indeed that, right, it could be just happenstance that Joseph meets a mysterious stranger, and because of that finds his brothers. But the rabbis see here, it's not just a happenstance encounter, right? If it is indeed Gabriel, a ministering angel, this says that now it's not just the random stranger who's forwarding the plot forward, right? That God has sent a messenger, or an angelic messenger appears to help also move this forward and have Joseph make sure Joseph encounters his brothers, right? And if there's a divine element to this, it sort of suggests it could have been that Joseph missed his brothers and went back home, but it's not just that the plot of the story and the actions of people are conspiring to link up Joseph with his brothers on this fateful day, that God's involved in making that happen as well. All right, moving forward in this scene, Joseph goes to Dothan. In fact, that's where his brothers are, and they see him from afar. And then, as you probably know, the hate comes up, and they say, "Up, here comes the dreamer. Here's the guy. Here's brother with all his dreams. And what's he going to come tell us? He's here to stand above us, and with his attitude, et cetera, et cetera." Fill in the blank yourself about what else they said with that. And what's their response? Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits. We can tell Dad. We could say a savage beast devoured him. We shall see what comes of his dreams. It's the moment that comes, we don't like this guy. We don't like what he has to say. We're out here in the fields. No one's around. We can get him and kill him. And we can come back with the story. He was attacked. Here, what helps Joseph in the plot and helps make this moment of the transition to Egypt happen is one of the brothers shows some strength to moderate what the brothers want to conspire to do. When Reuben heard it, Reuben tried to save Joseph from his brothers and said, let's not take his life. And Reuben went on and said, shed no blood, cast him into the pit out in the wilderness, but don't touch him yourselves, intending to save him from them and restore him to his father. So Reuben says, tries to protect his brother, keeps them from doing the worst of all things, and tries to minimize what they're going to conspire to do. And as a result, we know Joseph is attacked, thrown into a pit, not killed, and later sold to traveling Ishmaelites and sent down to Judah. Judah himself sent down to Egypt. Said the wrong word there. Sent down to Egypt. And it's not just Reuben who steps in. Judah also steps in and says, "What do we gain by killing our brother?" He steps up to protect him as well. Let's not kill him. Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. He'll move forward and go to Egypt. There's a mix in this text about Ishmaelites and Midianites, whether one sells them to another, we'll see. But either way, he's sold, taken down to Egypt, where then the story continues. Anyways, that's a quick take on the narrative. The piece is going through. I'm going to stop my share a minute and go back to the full screen. So, taking us through that text, just want to so you see, I hope, in this speedy version through the text, there's many actors, many characters, each motivated by all kinds of complex dynamics. We have themes in the story that are in the rest of the Torah too: sibling rivalry, lack of peace in the home, tension within the family, that for which the family has to deal. There are consequences to the characters, but on one element of all of this is not just those themes and not just the story of Jacob and his family, but in some way it's because of this moment. It's this piece of the plot that helps get the first step on the way. Once Joseph gets a foothold in Egypt, it leads to the later part of the story where everyone will follow. I don't want to, you might be familiar with the story, but we'll look at it in later weeks, all the other steps to this. But if we go back to those first verses we looked at, God told Abraham, your people's going to go to Egypt, be slaves there. In order for the story of slavery to start, it has to get there. And the story here shows that it's the actions of many characters that conspire to help get Joseph to Egypt. Joseph himself, because of his behavior, is culpable and moves down there. Jacob and the brothers and the mysterious man or perhaps angel that's there make that happen. So on top of being intense and wonderful drama, and the story of Joseph has lots of drama. It's a great story on its own. What I wanted to call out for you today is like all the different pieces that are written into the story, not just to be part of this narrative element of the book of Genesis and the story that's going to bring it to a close, but all these things and all the ways that all these people have to act to make sure that the Abraham's descendants get to Egypt so that the story of slavery and freedom from slavery take place. And it's a theme that will continue. And I guess I suggest as you read the story in the weeks to come, look at not just the moments of the story that occur to move the drama of the story itself forward, but look at all the moments of the story that help to fulfill this piece of the larger story of Genesis. What's going to happen to Abraham and his descendants? How will the covenant be fulfilled? How is it that this family gets to Egypt? How is it that they then, put themselves in the situation to endure the bondage and slavery that they have to in order to come out at the other side, to be free, to worship, to be in covenant and in community with God, and to move forward in the plot. We see all of those elements baked into the story just in these first scenes, and there's more coming later. And with that, let me pause. I see the text, the chat has been active, which is awesome. What I love about this sort of mode with so many of you online, it's harder to have a full discussion all together, but I love that there's all these messages. I have to say, I was not able to follow it as I was following the text, but as I'm starting to peek at it, I'm seeing Lots of wonderful comments. But Mara, I don't know if you were able to pull some things out to talk about or want to open up. I see some hands with some questions
Yeah.
as well.
Susie's had her hand raised for a while, so we'll go
All
to
right,
Susie and
so
then Jay.
there we go. Susie.
Hi, thank you. I loved everything that you pieced together for us and laid out. And what it brought to my mind was the wisdom of Hashem. He had this plan, it had to happen. He caused all these things that are human characteristics and tweaked them. And when they weren't going to happen, he sent possibly the angel to make it happen. But by doing all of this, not only does he move the story forward to go to where he wants it to, which is going to happen anyway because he wants it to, he's baked in lessons for us. Each one of these separate little stories and characteristics of the family teach us something about how we should behave and what is bad behavior. You shouldn't have a favorite child. You shouldn't hate your brother. You shouldn't laud things over somebody else, you know, all of those things. So God could have just snapped his fingers and made it happen and we would have been slaves in Egypt, but there would have been no great lesson in it. Here, we get lessons on how not to behave and how to eventually understand the teachings and the mitzvot and all of that to be the people he wants us to be.
Yeah, thank you for that, Susie. It's so a question that comes out of what you're saying, for me anyways, is if God is arranging all of this to teach us lessons, there are questions that emerge about, like, is there free will here? Meaning, how if God is orchestrating this, you know, are the characters doing this because this is how they're choosing to act, or did God take away the free will to act? I
No,
would say the place where what I hear what you're saying fits with me together. My parallel version to what you're saying is, I think this is the brilliance of Torah, meaning the Torah tells its stories and there are many layers that we can read from it, which are the lessons that you pulled out, right? We can both get lessons about family and interpersonal relationships as the plot moves forward in the way that it has to. And that might just be a difference between your theology and my theology about how we read the text and God's role in it. Although the story does talk about God having this, you know, if you read that the mysterious man in the field is somehow a messenger of God, right? We do see God acting in the story. But I appreciate what you're saying in terms of there's a beauty here of both, there's the lesson in and of itself that these stories teach us, and the way that it furthers this larger narrative about moving to the slavery in Egypt. And we get both of those, wherever that comes from. So thanks.
thank you.
Jay.
Actually, I was going to say the same thing in a different way. This sort of made me think, if this was all planned out, does that go against the idea that we have free will? And it's hard to understand, hard to put that together, because I think we're supposed to have free will, but God certainly had this plan, and maybe the plan was it's going to happen, but the specifics of the plan were affected by how people acted. So similar to what was said. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We know as well as we jump ahead to leaving from slavery, where the Torah says specifically God hardens Pharaoh's heart, and there's a specific statement of God took away someone's free will for a moment to cause a specific thing to happen. That's a tougher case than this, right? This we might see, well, God had this plan and it played out even with people acting with free will. I love that this came up, right? How much, it's a question, not just for this, right, the Joseph story, but, you know, how much free will do we have? How does God act in the world? To what degree does God influence what happens? To what degree is it all God's plan? To what degree is it, if you go back to my opening today, part of what I think the Torah is telling us is how God's plan changes, right? If it were up to God based on how the Torah opens, we would have stayed in the Garden of Eden. But it's free will that gets people into trouble by eating from the tree that changes God's plan. It's people's free will leading up to Noah's generation that causes God to start over. Some of the story of the Torah, I think, is about God's hope for how humanity will behave and God's disappointment that we don't live up to it. And some of that, for me anyways, reads in, well, we do have free will. That's why, that's one limit on God's power, our free will. It's coming from that perspective leads to lots of different questions about the world. And, if we have different thoughts about how God functions in the will, how much free will do we have? How much does God have the power to suspend our free will or to shape our events, even though we have it? We're certainly not going to answer those questions today. And there's more than one perspective on that, around in the world today and in Jewish sources. And I think it's a rich conversation. All right, Michael, I see your digital hand is up.
Yes, what you've said it better than I ever could. It really is an incredible family dynamic. And you're right. Human beings do have God's not you do this. Then what are we doing here? We're the ones who screw up. And we have to pay the consequences of that screwing up. It's certainly not exactly what God was. Like you said, for example, my theory about the Garden of Eden is it was a rigged deck, that God knew that they were going to eat off that tree. I think it's a rigged deck. That God knew was going to happen, and it happened, if you know what I'm saying.
Got it. Oh, God, creator of people, knew human nature. And God knew if I put people in the garden and there's one tree, if there's one rule, don't eat from the tree, that's a great read. God knew they're going to eat from the tree. And here's what's going to happen next. Because, right, we want people to have a taste of Eden, to know how they blew it, and to move on and to struggle to try to recapture it later. That's possible too, right? If God knows, and that works for this story, if God knows human nature, God knows, all these initial families and the tensions and tsuris they have because of human nature will happen. And maybe that's why, given my opening narrative, the Israelite people need to sort of incubate, and that's not a great word for it, but under 400 years of slavery, so that they might emerge in a place to be able to embrace God in a different way than happens early on. Thanks, Michael, for that. I appreciate that. Martha. Are you there, Martha? Can you unmute?
Yes.
Okay, great.
One of the things is that for me, Jacob or Israel had to treat Joseph differently, with more love, because he didn't have a mother. And Joseph needed to be grounded in love and security to fulfill his destiny. And the other thing is that when we look at the Parsha, we see that Joseph did not interpret his dream. The people that interpret the dream were the brothers. And that's something that sometimes we miss. And a moral of the story here, it is that when you dream, you should always share your dream with people that love you and care about you, because dreams can be self-fulfilling. And so that's all I wanted to say. I think that's one of the very important lessons about our dreams. Who do we share with? So and when we share with people that don't like us, they come self-fulfillment. That is, they interpret it in a better way. So that's all. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Martha. What I love about the Torah and these conversations is there's so many different ways to read these stories, right? And I had a little more critical look at Jacob for preferencing one child. What Martha brought to our attention is, well, Joseph grew up without a mother. His mother died young when he was young, and maybe that child needs something different. And it's a different spin on, right, Jacob and Jacob's parenthood. And, for those who are in the room who are parents, know that not, if you have multiple children, they need different things and they need you to be a different parent. Maybe Joseph needed a different kind of parenting. And what, Jacob's decision to parent in the way that Jacob did might have been well deserved. I love that perspective. And I love what you said about dreams as well. Thank you for that. Anybody else have a comment or a question? Brenda. Brenda, are you with
I
us?
don't-
Oh, there.
Let's go to Hannah.
Okay, Hannah, why don't you unmute?
Well, basically, what I just wanted to say right now was to thank Martha for her incredible, compassionate teaching. I've really appreciated what everyone has said, of course, but thank you for that compassion. That was a completely different take on the story that I've ever heard.
Great. Thanks for that expression of gratitude. It's true. I always leave with so many new perspectives from, folks in this room about the Torah, and I concur. Thank you for sharing that. Brett is having trouble unmuting, I think. Mara, are you able to assist her with that? Not sure that I have a button.
I'm trying.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I don't know why it's not working.
Brenda, will you try to unmute again? See if it'll happen this time. No, not having success. I'm not.
We have about 3 minutes left. And so we can take a look at some of the comments in the chat. But also as we head into Hanukkah, or Shabbat and then into Hanukkah, Rabbi, I would hope that you could leave us with a blessing. So what hopes do you have as we enter Shabbat?
I'm happy to end it that way there. I will say in the long list of comments, there's some tremendous Torah in the chat. I hope you've been able to follow along. Someone noted, I saw earlier in the chat, not connected to Parashat HaShavua, but noticing that we're nearing the winter solstice. We're nearing the shortest day of the year. Actually connected, this week's Parsha, I would say the shortest day of the year has the most darkness. At least for those of us, I should say, that's for those of us in the northern hemisphere. I think I saw some people chime in that they're in the southern hemisphere. So you guys are on an opposite. Must be interesting in the southern hemisphere where Hanukkah's around the summer solstice, which is the holiday of light at the time of year when there's the most light. But we're coming up on a holiday of light at a dark time of the year. The Parsha ends this week. I'm skipping ahead through some of the plot points, but Joseph ends this week seemingly rotted, in a jail cell. His hope for freedom, right? One of his co-prisoners is freed, and he hopes that his co-prisoner will mention him to the authorities as an interpreter of dreams to get out. But alas, the prisoner who has freed has forgotten Joseph and moved on to his life. And we end this Parsha at a low moment for Joseph, a dark moment for Joseph. I picture Joseph, right, in a dark, cold jail cell, immersed in darkness with little hope, with little light. And we find ourselves at that time of year where the environment in the Northern Hemisphere is providing it with the least amount of light. And there's a lot in the world that could cause us to feel the darkness, not just in nature, but in terms of world events and what's happening. That's one of the reasons why at this time of year we have a holiday of light. And as we enter into Shabbat and we light the candles to bring that in, and we soon add more candles for the holiday of Hanukkah, I hope that the light of the candles sparks the flame inside of all of us and helps us become our own shamash, right? The candle with which we light other candles. And it's through the light that we each bring and the way that we can light each other's candles and help spread that light, that we can pick ourselves up off the floor of the cell in which we find ourselves, if we're like Joseph, or wherever it is we find ourselves, and emerge from the ways in which we feel shackled and step out into the world to be bringers of light and to spark the light in others. And it's the hope of the winter holidays and the light of the winter holidays that I think should sustain us and help us do our part to bring more light and to have the 2025, right? We're also at the point of we're changing over the secular calendar year, be one that's more hopeful, more light, more promise, more steps forward for all of us. Less sibling rivalry, more freedom, more fulfilling God's purpose on earth. So with that,
Thank you so
Shabbat
much.
shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everyone. Happy Hanukkah. Hanukkah Sameach.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
everybody.